Hello, everybody. This is Board Game Chat. I'm Myron.
And I'm Chris.
Hello, Myron. How are you doing there today?
Good. Hot.
Yeah.
But
Hot?
good.
Yes,
Yeah.
It's a hot, humid, sticky day, which is nice because we've all been stuck indoors for so long. It's nice to get out and sweat a little bit if we need to.
Yeah, sometimes. Just a little bit, though.
So the last time since we chatted, you and I got together and our wives, Anna and Sherry,
Yeah. IRL.
in real life for the first
Yeah, we
time
hugged.
since the
We
whole
actually hugged.
Yes, we did. We did the post-pandemic hug because we are both double vaxxed or doubled, as we call it here in Canada. And that was wonderful. We played lots of games. You played some new games to you.
Yeah. I actually played a lot of games. So like normally I have ADHD, and I'm realizing as I'm like communicating more with like neurodivergent communities, some of the things that I thought were just like Myron like actually are in there. Like, so for example, like it's super intense for me to be like in a space with people, and even before the pandemic I could last 3 hours, and then this, I'd be like, all right, I'm leaving, and it was just normal. Y'all would be like, just assume a position of driving Anna home later on, and like I would just go to recharge, and so it was super intense, but totally worth it.
Yes, we played a lot more games with Anna when you went to go nap.
Yes, that's the normal, right?
To take a break, and that's totally fine. We had a lot of fun with you, and we had fun with Anna as well. I actually had an amazing month. I played, I think it was 84 games, something
Wow.
like 43 different games in the month of July. August is probably not that much, but that is a testament, I think, to how much we have all needed the pandemic to end. So, because we've had quite a few people come up on weekends and stuff, so we've been gaming a lot with new people.
Yeah, dude, you're putting real numbers up. Like, that's real numbers.
Yeah, that's a record for me. Not to brag, but that was a record. I was blown away. But anyway, we don't want to talk about ourselves or to ourselves. We have a guest again today. Today we're going to talk with Paul Booth. Paul is an author of several books on board games and different fandoms. He's also a professor of media studies at Depaul University, where he teaches classes in media and pop culture. Hi, Paul.
Yeah. Hey, how are you? It's good to be here.
Hey, thank you for coming.
You know, Myron, it's funny. When I was listening to your intro, I also was recently diagnosed with ADHD, and I thought all of the weird stuff that I did was just weird stuff that I did. I also would have to like recharge at parties. It actually really helps my board gaming because I can like super focus, but I can't change tracks very easily. So like, if I'm in something, it's really hard for me to get out of it.
Yes.
Cool. It was right before the pandemic. I kind of got diagnosed. So it's cool to hear that's a similar thing.
Well, I noticed that like when I said it, you like, and I described what it was, you like leaned forward and you're like, oh, yeah. And so like, let me ask you, Chris, does this make sense for you? Like, cause you've seen this in real time. Like Chris is the producer of our board game activities also. And so Chris is the person that just leans into it with his heart. And he's like, we have Myron for like 2 hours. Anna's good. So we'll schedule a day around Anna being able to be here until 9 p.m. But for the 2 hours that Myron's here, let's pick the perfect game we want to make sure that there's a game that Myron knows how to play, because introducing games and like having to learn and be focused on new rules, it is very hard and taxing. So we'll start with the softball game, and then we'll do a game that's very quick, no longer than 45 minutes, unless it's a theme that Myron is in love with.
Yeah. That's perfect. That describes it perfectly. I'm always on the hunt for that game, that 45 minutes to an hour theme related game that Myron will like with easy rules.
It's funny because symptoms, I did some research on it, and but symptoms they can be different, right? So like I don't have a problem learning rules. I'm actually really good at learning rules, but I have very different kinds of problems, but it's such a wide ranging kind of mental block in some ways that it can manifest in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just had this idea in my head that, ADHD just means like hyperactive, but it's so much more complex than that. It's so much more detailed. Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like well, I think they're beginning to realize that it's more like a spectrum, kind of like autism spectrum disorders. And so like beyond that though, it's like a communicative disorder. Like how do you interact with the environment and like other brains? And that's really what it is. Cause like you could have 100 people and like you were saying, Paul, they have and or need different things.
Yeah. And I think, so like if Chris is able to accommodate your particular needs and other people's particular needs, it's just a good friend, right? Like that's, it would be the same thing if you had a broken arm, or, he wouldn't suddenly make you reach for a million things. You'd find games where you could use one hand or whatever.
Right.
The metaphor gets a bit thin after a while, but
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no point taken. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Paul?
Sure. Well, like you said, I'm a professor at Depaul University in Chicago, and I've been here. This was the start of my 12th year, and congrats. It doesn't seem that long, but when you look back, you're like, oh man, yeah, it's the longest I've ever really been in one place as an adult. But I've managed to eke out a career where I get to kind of spend most of my time doing things that I enjoy, which is beyond like I'm so lucky, and I get to teach classes about games and fandom and television and digital media, and I get to write books about board games, and I get to plan conferences with interesting people, and it's just been I have a job that I just really enjoy going to every day, which I know that is unusual. I feel very privileged to be able to do that. But the flip side of that, I guess, is that everything I do for fun ends up becoming part of my job because I study popular culture and fandom. And so that's actually how I got into writing books and studying board games. Is I love board games, and I've loved board games for many years. And then one day I was sitting with my best friend and we were playing, I can't remember. I think it was probably the Battlestar Galactica game. And I was also watching Battlestar Galactica at the time. So I was just like, there are some interesting things happening here in terms of TV and fandom and how the game is representing this. And then I was like, oh man, now I'm going to have to start researching this, and it's going to become a thing. And lo and behold, 6 years later, I have 2 books about board games, and I teach a board game class, and I am happier than ever. So follow your dreams, kids.
That's really cool. So did the teaching come first or the board gaming come first?
In my life, the teaching came first. I liked board games when I was a kid, and I remember playing like Diplomacy and Allies and what is it?
Axis.
Allies and Axis. Yeah, with my friends. But at a certain point, I think when I went to college, I stopped. I didn't have friends that played games in college. I didn't know enough to get into games. It was just before games got really big. So I played some video games and stuff, but I didn't get into board games until I came to Chicago, and my best friend was really into board games, and then we started playing together. So I've been teaching since 2003-ish. But I've only maybe the past 10 years have been really kind of focused on board games in my personal life, but also in my professional life.
Cool.
Nice.
Do you remember your gateway game for modern board games?
I knew you were going to ask me this, and I've been racking my brains, and it wasn't Catan, and it wasn't Ticket to Ride. Honestly, I think it was probably Dominion.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
That's cool.
Like I feel like I dove into the deep end at some point. Like I feel it wouldn't have been my choice. I think I was over at my friend's house, and he's like, "Hey, I've got this game. I want to try it." And I'm like, "Okay." And I think it was something, maybe like something super complicated, but it just struck it scratched that itch of like, I want something I can think about, that I can work at, but then also gives me the satisfaction of completing a task, you know?
Right.
So I feel like it was probably Dominion, maybe Agricola, you know, something that wasn't one of the two big ones, but
right.
Yeah.
And I guess Diplomacy counts as a modern board game too. You said that, and Axis and Allies.
Yeah, I was playing that when I was in high school with my friends. And I didn't think of them at the time as board games. Like, I obviously I know they are, but like, it was just me and my 5 friends getting together and doing this thing for an afternoon. It didn't like equate to being like a board game. I wouldn't have called myself a gamer, right?
Yeah. Like, it could have been anything. Like,
we also made movies together and went and talked about Star Trek. So like, that was one of the things we did.
It's like, there's a difference between like when you're an adult and you're like, all right, okay, I can choose what to do. So now I'm going to do this thing. And so like, I have a follow-up question for the one that Chris asked. How long do you think your friend was like evaluating when to introduce you to board games?
Oh, not very long. he and I we have very, very similar brains, to the point that like we'll both come up with the same joke at the same time, type of thing. And he very quickly would have been like, if I'm into this, Paul's going to be into this.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it was more a question of like, when are we going to have 3 or 4 hours to get together to do this?
That's awesome. Do you have a game that you're obsessing about, or a favorite game that you have right now?
My favorite game, and this sounds so stupid, but my favorite game is usually the game that is on the table. Like, because I get so into it, and then I can't think of it. So like, I was just playing Wingspan, and Wingspan is such a wonderful game. And I was like, oh, you know what? I wonder if this is my favorite game. But then we also started playing Arkham Horror card game. And I'm like, oh no, this is definitely my favorite game. And then I'm like, but I spent, 100 hours playing Gloomhaven. That's got to be my favorite game.
Right.
I think if Desert Island, I have to take only one board game with me, it would be Gloomhaven.
Yeah. Good choice.
Because you also could build a house out of all of the materials that's in it. But man, I played Gloomhaven solo, and just kind of set up on a table in my basement for basically a year. It just was down there, and every couple nights, I would go down there and play a couple of turns. And I got so invested in that world, and I still have I still remember the names of my characters, and like I became very attached to them. It was the way that people describe role-playing games, which I'm not. I don't play a lot of role-playing games.
Yeah, I was going to ask that.
But
like all these books right here are role-playing games. I'm a role-playing gamer as well.
I really want to get into role-playing games, but I just haven't found a group yet, I guess. Every group everyone I know that plays has already got a group. So I haven't gotten into it. But Gloomhaven scratched that for me. It really did.
Cool. I have to get that on Steam because I've been looking at it and I was like, okay, this looks like a really amazing RPG. And then it's like, oh, it's actually a board game, and they update it all the time. Like, speaking of like, a shelter, like, not an A-frame either, like elevated above the water with running water and plumbing, the whole 9 yards. And so I'm going to try that out.
Yeah,
I've never played the Steam version, so I would be really curious to know how it is. Because one of the things I really love about Gloomhaven is its physicality. Is like the character, little plastic minis, and the cardboard standees for the bad guys, and I like the nitty gritty of playing a card and figuring out the math of how the hit gets things. So, but I know some people don't like any of that stuff. So I would be really curious to hear what you think of the Steam version.
Yeah, I'm going to check it out. You know, what I'm looking forward to is there's one game that they've taken a tabletop experience into. It's like Devo. They've taken the tabletop experience into VR, and I'm really interested in whether, because I've actually been experimenting for like distributed work, like actually like creating like a virtual space where I have an avatar and I like chill with people and get like the spatial part of being in a space or a place with people is really important. And like you can simulate a lot of that. So I think that is probably going to be the next place that board games go. I don't know how I got there, but right now that just seems like one of the cool things to consider.
Well, certainly, I mean, in the pandemic, I think we've seen so much board game stuff transition to online. Tabletop simulator, board game arena, you know, people finding ways. I remember my best friend that I play a lot of games with, we figured out a way to hook up cameras because we have a lot of the same games. So we'd lay out a board game and like I'd zoom in with my phone and my computer so I could communicate and see this other kind of stuff.
We did the same kind of thing. We played a lot of Board Game Arena and some Tabletopia and Tabletop Simulator, but with a couple of friends, we did that as well. We just 2 copies of the game at different locations, and you mirror, you know, the other house's actions, and it works pretty well. It's just a longer game, but it was fun. Yeah, it was a good way to stay.
I mean, what else were we doing? You know,
exactly. Yeah. We all had extra time.
Yeah.
Well,
I just want to get the name of that game out real quick, Chris.
Yeah.
It's called Demeo, Demeo, and that's an experience that's on Oculus VR right now. And I do think that there's a really, really cool space for that. But yeah, go on. Sorry.
No, that's cool. Thank you for telling us that. I'm anxious to see what'll happen in the board game world, because board games went really quickly to sort of the digital technology real quick, not just creating sort of online versions or digital versions of the games, but actually adding apps and, you know, soundtracks and that kind of thing. So I imagine that VR will be adopted pretty quickly by, you know, board game publishers and that kind of thing as soon as it becomes more available and affordable to everyone, and they'll be able to do some really interesting things.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I want to hear, Paul, about the books that you've written. I know of a couple, and correct me if I'm not wrong, but the newest one is Board Games as Media. That one is brand new?
Yes, that one wonderfully timed to come out January 2021. So just as I was expecting to be able to promote this book and take it to shows and bring it to classes, everything was closed. So it came out in January. I'm so happy with this book and so pleased with it. It's kind of the culmination of a lot of my thinking over the past 5 years, because it basically my area is media studies. So I took film classes in college, television classes. I learned about how you study the media. You know, what are some of the ways that film communicates messages, and how can we understand what Quentin Tarantino is telling us with his films, right?
Right.
And then, but I was playing a lot of board games. I'm like, you know, these are doing the same thing. They're communicating all sorts of messages. Messages about birds or about human interaction or about colonization.
Right.
But we don't have a language to talk about the types of messages that board games are communicating. So that's what Board Games as Media. I took it. It basically opens with the question: what happens if we assume that board games are like film and like television, and they communicate things about our culture. What are those messages? How do we interpret them? How do we understand them? And each chapter looks at different board games through different kind of media studies lenses to say, all right, let's say we're going to look at this from a purely textual perspective. What is the text saying? Or what is the ideology? Or I also did ethnography. So I did a survey of 1,000 board gamers. And I said, how are you interpreting board games? And that ended up being a big part of the book. So it really looks at the way that board games, is certainly in becoming such a big part of our culture over the past 10 years, are also saying some really interesting things about that culture.
Yeah. That's really interesting, Paul, because I'm looking at, I took a look at the table of contents, which thanks to the Google is possible in this day and age. And I love the aspect of surveying board gamers. And one of the things that keeps me in board games is the sense of community. And in my day job, I'm an agile coach, or a principal agile coach. And one of the key things that I'm responsible for is building engagement and building a culture as we've moved to a digital first distributed model. And I think about board games a lot from this perspective, because the culture, the community is a really big aspect of it. And one of the things that I've realized recently is that people feel a little less connected to the space. And they say, maybe it's because we don't get to see each other in person. But I think it's probably because we don't focus on play.
Yeah.
And it's this. So I came up with a phrase. How do I capture this idea of play? You play for fun, like those funny moments where someone spills a coffee, and how do you optimize that then? How do you get that to an 8-hour day? Well, you have to optimize it, compress it. And here's the phrase, the anecdote that I use. You had to be there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You had to be there when Myron spilled his water from the cup. That sounds pretty normal, but did you know it was a Hulk mug that was like this big, and the size of that puddle, the joke, yeah, Myron spilled his water and the bottom 3 floors of the building were flooded. You had to be there. Now it's 25 years later, and I still remember that moment. And so how do we use board games and the types of culture and community that this thing creates to optimize play in the work center when we're distributed, when we're enabling so much opportunity for people?
That's a great question, and I feel like you've hit upon a couple of things that are so crucial, right? When we play board games, there's a sense of we're all experiencing this thing together, whether we're cooperating or whether we're competing. We are all creating this world, for this hour or 2 hours or however long, we are creating that kind of bubble of play. And so any one of us could ruin it by taking things too seriously or getting hurt or being rude, right? It's very easy to break that bubble. But when it works, it feels like we are been transported somewhere else. And so I think that you had to be there is kind of encapsulating that feeling, right?
It's dope, right?
Yeah.
It's like when you were talking about when you were in high school and you were playing with your 5 buddies, and it was like, well, really, we could have been playing anything because we had established that bubble already.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And when I surveyed those board gamers, the number one answer for why people like to play games was to be with other people. It by far, we're talking about something like 60% of the people that was part of their answer. Winning a board game, very far down low on the list. It was about that creating that shared space, the kind of shared moment together.
Yeah.
That was crucial.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's excellent. I love the idea. I mean, I think that for me, that's one of the reasons I've stopped playing digital games, because even if you're connecting with people you know online, there's just something that is missing that you get from sitting around a table with people face to face. And
yeah, I echo that so much. I used to play a lot of video games, and I've got a Switch downstairs and all this stuff. And no offense to video gamers, I plenty of people I know love video. Although we've got one on the screen right now. Plenty of people I know love video games, and more power to them. This is not a value judgment, but for me, it never feels like I'm. It always kind of feels like I'm wasting time when I'm playing a video game. It never feels that way when I'm playing a board game, because I'm also getting that kind of social activity. And I know other people are totally different. And again, I'm not trying to be negative about video games, but for me personally, it's that social feeling of connection, and accomplishing a task together.
Absolutely.
And a video game, almost even a video game that played with multiple people, still feels like a solo event. Whereas, what do they call it? Multiplayer solo tabletop game where we're all sitting around the table it's a shared event. It's something impersonal, in person. So board games as media, where can people get that book?
It's on Amazon. So it is available on Amazon. It's also available at the publisher is Bloomsbury. So if you want to avoid Amazon, you can go to Bloomsbury, and I believe they have there's a % off at the moment because it's still relatively new. So and it's for a kind of book that's been written for classrooms and academics. It's very reasonably priced. I have no control over that. I also don't make very much money from it, so I don't feel that bad telling you that. Right. I just really want people to be able to read it, and I want to have board games brought more into conversations. So to me, that's the important part. So I'd love for people to go out there and get it, and let me know how they like it.
Cool.
I think as an agile coach, similar to there's another concept that I learned about through Chris in the board game community, this fail faster concept. And as an agilist, I think I'm actually picking the book up, not to pander too much, but I'm actually contemplating what is it about play? If we were to create a physical space for teams to come into the office or meet regionally, I want to have a play lab. I want to optimize play. We do a few ceremonies that are business related. Again, we have a nice team and we could be doing anything, but they're primarily going there. If it's an 8-hour day, it's going to be 5 hours of play with 3 intermissions to get this textbook stuff done during the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think just looking at the high level view of that chapter 6 is going to give me some insights into what are the mechanisms that are happening behind the scenes when you put people together and build a strong community, because that's what most workspaces, that's what most work that's what most CEOs and stuff who are trying to say you have to come back for culture, quote unquote, and they can't quantify it. And I'm like, all right, there's something to this. We need to figure it out.
It reminds me of escape rooms, right? That are that have been used as team building or corporate kind of building things. And I've written some academic articles about escape rooms because I find them fascinating and I also love them. But there's been some really interesting things written about escape rooms as a physical manifestation of play and how to have teams come together. It is definitely an area that is being explored in kind of academic circles.
Wow.
That sounds very exciting. So on that note, you're a professor at Depaul University. You teach a class about board games?
I do. So you had earlier asked me, which came first, teaching or board games. And what's interesting is the class about board games happened when, because I wrote the book, Board Games as Media. So it takes a very long time for a book like that to be published. So I finished writing it in 2019. It didn't come out till 2021. And in 2020, I taught a class called Board Games as Media, where I was like, hey, I wrote this book. I might as well test out these ideas.
Right.
And it's become, I've only taught it once because then we had the pandemic, and I very hard to teach a board game class online, although I know people who have. But I didn't want to. But I'm scheduled to teach it again next year. I got to try out all of these ideas. I got to have the students in every class. We would play a board game, and then we would talk about what was that experience like? What are some of the messages you got from this game? How, if we were using this lens to look at it, how would you do that? So we played, and I also wanted to introduce them to the board game hobby. So we did play Catan. We played Betrayal at House on the Hill. We played one of the best days, and this was actually an activity that my friend Shira Chess recommended to me. We played One Night Ultimate Werewolf and also just Werewolf, and compared the two, how they did things differently. Oh, we had a great discussion. And then I had the students, their final project was they were in groups and they designed their own board game to have some sort of message that they wanted to communicate. And so I had one group do a game about cats, like the feral cat population. And then another group did a game about gossip and how to good and bad gossip, and you got points for good gossip and negative points for bad gossip. It was just what an amazing array of games. And they designed them in 3 weeks, so they weren't 100% ready to go on the market, but they were good enough that they were actually fun to play. And so it was really exciting to be there and see this kind of creativity pop up. It's one of the best classes I've ever taught. It was so much fun. And I feel like we learned a lot too.
That sounds like a blast. I want to go to that class. So I have to move to Chicago. Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're
basically? Yeah, I got to move to Chicago. I offer a graduate section and an undergraduate section, so whichever one fits your bill. But it's I do, because the classes I teach tend to be game related or fandom related or pop culture in some way. I do, whenever I talk to people, they're always like, "Oh, I want to go back to school now," and I feel like I love that, because to me, that's why I study pop culture. Is everything we do is important and means something and communicates something. And if I can get people to think about the TV that they watch and the games that they play just a little bit, just to think about them a little bit critically. That we make better media products, we make better games, we become better consumers, better citizens when we're more aware of the world. So,
all of those things say something about the world in general, our world, and the way we see it, right? The TV shows that we watch, the things that we like, the books that we read, the games that we play, they all say something about the world.
Yeah, and they shape, they say something about the world, and they shape our interpretation of the world. If you only ever consumed, I don't know how political you want to get, but if you only ever consumed a certain media or a certain news program, you're going to see the world in a different way. Right?
Yeah, right. So would you say the students in your class, would you describe them as hardcore gamers primarily, or new to gaming?
I had about, I think I had 20 students in that class. And I think of that, 2 of them would have considered themselves more gamers.
Okay.
They had played a bunch of games. They knew what gaming was. 18 of them thought we were going to talk about Monopoly. And it was I think it was a bit of a shock for them. I remember we played, I had them play one of the cases, I think the first case of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. And they kind of, as we were playing it, they looked at me like, is this a game? like I feel like I'm just researching. And I'm like, yeah, and that's fun.
Well, I think the cool thing about that, even that game is, we were talking with, we had a guest, Justin, on our first episode, and we talked about like the idea of people getting so interested in education, learning, because the goal is to explore board games. And we talked about like, what does it look like to change the goals of education? And so what if we could, you used a particular word a few minutes ago. You said critical. And like, so how do we create systems of learning where people are from a more constructivist perspective versus behaviors where we're actually thinking about thinking and about the thinking that was the thinking, and how do we critically do that so we understand like what people are going through while they're going through those changes, or while they're picking up this knowledge. And I think board games, even if you just put gamification into education systems, you change the goals from here are the perfect kids and here are the people who, because they don't get everything right, can't do anything right. Because when you're dealing with board games, there's like all kinds of different skills that go into play. So I studied school psychology, and one of the first things that you learn is if a kid can't speak, you give them dice, and you create. And so when you think about the typical board game, there are a bunch of different parts of the brain that need to be leveraged, and you can find like things about people in that on that group or in that team that are really special, even if they can't do, massive operations in their head to like get the final score. You can find a person that's really good in reflex games. Boom. And that person, just like team sports, can actually like look special in front of like their peers versus like one setting. So I know I said a bunch of things just riffing through it, but I think that we could create systems of education that included those things and that really supercharged people's interest. I'm going to, for example, I read this book and I'm like, I really want to understand how to do these kinds of analyses. And I get to play board games, so I'm going to figure out how to get into grad school. I'm going to figure out how to get into that graduate session, and eventually I'm going to be there. Just about every person that's gone and done an advanced degree was inspired at some point.
Yeah.
And why not focus on giving people more opportunities like in the standard day to figure those things out?
Yeah, that's so important, right? And one of the things you said there that I really take to heart is you have to help people feel like they've accomplished something. Or not even feel like they accomplished. You have to help people accomplish things. Like being a teacher, nobody learns when they feel like they're failing, right? If you got a big F on an assignment, it does not motivate you to want to do better. Some people maybe, but like most people get an F and they're like, well, I suck at this, I guess I'm done. Right. So like the job of a teacher, in my opinion, is to try and stimulate an interest in whatever it is that you're teaching. So, I'm teaching a class on board games, or I'm teaching a class on fandom, or I'm teaching a class on Doctor Who, which I know is something that we might talk about a little bit. But it's not just about those things. It's about hiding the broccoli and the cookie. It's like we're gonna learn how to see the politics behind the production of a board game by playing Betrayal at House on the Hill and talking about the company that made it and then who they sold it to. And we're gonna learn about white privilege in the media by looking at these programs from the 1980s, right? Yeah. And they're fun programs, but then
Tom and Jerry.
Yeah.
You know?
And then we're going to talk about some of the larger issues there. And so it helps people feel like not only accomplished because they can see the connections. We're not talking about very heady, esoteric stuff. Like, it applies to their own life, but also they can do it themselves. So, you know, we analyze an episode of Doctor Who. They're going to go home. They're going to watch an episode of, I don't know, Star Trek or Doctor Who or
Law and Order.
Law and Order.
Yeah.
And they're going to be like, oh, I remember when we talked about racism, and I'm seeing that in this episode, you know? And it's not going to happen every time, but it's going to happen enough that they start to think a little bit more about it. So it's helping people feel accomplished, and then also helping people apply those things that they're learning in their own life, because it's the classroom is 3 hours a week, and the rest of the day, the rest of the week, you're on your own.
Right. Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of changing those goals. The goal is to, for example, if the goal is have a really great time, but in order to have a great time, you have to learn how these mechanics work. Yeah. And so now I'm not just learning how to pass the test, to use like one of the most outplayed analogies or anecdotes about education. I'm learning how to, you know, make a game about cats, because it was a lot of fun.
Right.
And if you think about it, that's what board games themselves teach us. We learn some basic rules, some basic systems, and once we've mastered them, we can apply them in new ways and make them work for us to accomplish what we're looking for in the game. When you figure out how to chain the brown powers in Wingspan, right? It's not taught anywhere, but at a certain point, you're like, oh, wait, if I put this here, I'm going to get an egg, and I can then spend that egg to get a food, and I can then spend that food to get another bird, right? As gamers, we know how that works. We know engine building. Yeah. But imagine, my parents played Wingspan. They're not gamers. But by the end of that game, my dad had figured out how to like spend an egg to get 4 eggs. Right. And he was just collecting eggs. He just was like, this engine works, you know? And to see that happen in him, and he's years out of school, right? But like, it was still that moment of just like, I got it. I figured it out.
Yeah.
It was amazing. It was amazing.
Yeah, that is a fun moment. And it happens pretty much every new game that you play, right? There's this moment in the middle that just goes, oh, that's what I should be doing, or that's what I should have done, or something like that. Or, wow, this really worked out really well, and I know how to now exploit what I've learned.
Yeah.
And the other thing
Go. I was going to make a joke, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. The other thing I was going to say is something you said that just jumped into my head was, it is so natural for us to look at the way games are made. So many times when I am playing a game with people who are new to games, they'll be like, oh, you know what? The rules should be this way. We should do it this way, or that kind of thing. Yeah. And then from there, often, develops into house rules, right? The more you play this game, all of a sudden, when we play it, now we're going to play it not by the main rules, but we're going to do this one little thing differently, kind of thing. It's such a natural part of gaming and play, is to sort of change rules, make rules, make it our own. Yeah.
And to go back, when we talk about the difference with video games, you can't really house rule a video game.
No,
you're kind of stuck with what the game has programmed, and that's challenging in and of itself, and it can be very rewarding. But I love playing a board game and being able to cheat. I don't do it all the time. But you know what? If I'm playing a board game with my partner and she's having an unhappy time because she keeps drawing a bad card or keeps rolling low, right. and I want to say, you know what? Take another roll so that you can have a better time. Everyone wins, right?
Yeah,
we have a better time playing the game. obviously, you don't necessarily do that when you're with a hardcore gamer. So you're at a tournament or you're, playing with a bunch of really intense friends. But if I'm sitting down and I just want to have a fun evening, yeah, I'm going to re-roll a die once or twice to make the game be more fun, and I'm done apologizing for that because the game can be whatever I want it to be. And I see house rules kind of similar to that. I can make a house rule that you can mulligan your hand if you want to.
Right.
But I don't have to, right? I would never look down on someone for not doing that. But if it makes the game more enjoyable,
Yeah. Like it's like anyone who's played Monopoly.
Yeah.
Like literally, like in it, like house rules in times, like the number of times you play. Like literally every single time. N is the number of new people who come to the table. And there's a different house rule. Oh, you played this like this? Oh yeah. We actually give 500 because of this, and if you go to jail, it's actually doubled, and blah blah blah. And the banker is corrupt, and so you can. I mean, literally, like there's literally a YouTube video right now. They're like, I think it's like BuzzFeed or something like that. Like, we play Monopoly with the original rules. Yeah. And it's just like on the front page, like a million links. Like it just showed up a couple days ago.
No one plays Monopoly the right way. No one.
Right. Yeah. But to talk about culture, though, there's this term when I was studying school psychology, induction, like the idea of doing for the group. And so I think that's the biggest difference in like playing board games, like in person. For the most part, people come to that setting, to the play bubble, with an interest in making the play bubble fun for everyone.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, when I play video games, I play multiplayer games with people who have already formed that bubble. Again, it's that thing of, we could be playing anything because we've already established this community. Now, I don't go on Xbox and look for a group and find random people because there's no commitment to the benefit of the entire group. The induction is lost. Now, there are some cultures that induction is like there's a game called Final Fantasy XI that came out a bunch of years ago. When I first started, I played a tiny white mage. Now, groups really wanted white mages, and when it first came out, they released it in Japan and in the United States. And I established a relation, like an actual reputation for doing my best for the sake of the group. Now, I could get into groups that were from different cultures, but like other people, they would just start talking with you in Japanese. And if you didn't respond within like 5 seconds, they'd kick you out because from a cultural perspective in North America, we play for different reasons generally with randoms or random people pickup group, that kind of stuff. Fascinating.
Yeah. It is. And I feel like that's why if you have a regular game group, like we, at least with my group, we try new games all the time because it doesn't really matter that much. It's about the social space that we've created. And I trust that they're going to pick interesting things and they trust me. And like it deepens our relationships.
Paul, dude, like I think that you are onto something. I think that your research has culminated and the book was launched. It was delayed and it sucks that the pandemic is happening right now. But I will tell you that you can assume that 90 to 99% of organizations and leaders don't know how to do distributed teams. They don't know how to create those play spaces. They don't know how to create those mini cultural societies. And I suspect that you do. And I suspect that knowledge is going to be very valuable, like right now.
Apollo.
That's awesome.
Hi, bud.
And I would love to continue having this conversation with as many people as I can. Because I do feel like this is such an important part of our culture that we just don't talk about.
Yeah.
So I want to get back to something you said a while ago. You had said you also teach a class on Doctor Who. I'm a huge Doctor Who fan, And so that's now 2 courses I think I'm going to have to take.
You almost have a major at this point.
I want to hear all about that, or at least briefly about it.
Yeah. Well, I seriously could talk forever. Your listeners can't see the video, but behind me, I'm in my home office, which is basically just filled with Doctor Who things. So I have all of my Doctor Who Funko Pops, all of my little Doctor Who figures, books, all sorts of things. So I've been a massive Doctor Who fan since I was a kid. I grew up in the Chicago area, and they used to be shown on our public television station when I was growing up, and I like it. It was the show that hit me, right? You know, everyone has that show. That one hit me, but it has stuck with me. And it was always like board games. It was always a peripheral interest to my work, to my academic life, except my PhD was really focused on fans. And I got really interested in kind of what you're talking about, Myron, how these communities form where people are engaged with each other and work together. In fandom, it's about a particular media text, but with board games, it's about a game, you know? Yeah. And so I got really into fandoms, and I still didn't put it together with Doctor Who until I started at Depaul, and there's a Doctor Who convention in Chicago. And I was like, I love Doctor Who. I'm going to go to this convention. And I'm like, those people are fans. I write about fans. I write about me. And I just had this bizarre epiphany. Like, I'm embarrassed because I should have thought of it years and years earlier. And then I was like, well, okay, I gotta. So I started doing more research into Doctor Who fans specifically and delving into that. And then for the 50th anniversary of Doctor Who, 2013, I was teaching a different class, and one of the students came up to me who knew I was a Doctor Who fan and knew I taught other classes about pop culture. And he said, well, why don't you do a class on Doctor Who? And I'm like, oh man, like, I can't believe I didn't think of this earlier. And Depaul has always been very good to me. I teach the classes I have to teach, but they also give me classes, give me time and space to develop new classes. And they have this wonderful program called the First Year Program. So it's only for first year students. And they take a pop culture topic and then teach it using 3 different academic methodologies. So it's a way for students to learn how to be a student while studying something they're interested in. So I teach the Doctor Who one, but there's like a Chicago Cubs class and a soap operas class and a jazz in Chicago class, you know, all sorts of fun topics. So I got permission to teach this class as a Doctor Who class. And I teach it every year. It fills every year. What's been really interesting to me is, and I do the whole history of Doctor Who from 1963 all the way through today. And when I first started teaching it, the students came in and I'd be like, you know, who's your doctor? And they'd say, oh, David Tennant. And then a couple of years later, oh, Matt Smith. And a couple of years later, oh, Peter Capaldi, because it's always the one that they started with. And now they've just all they're always 18. And so they started watching Doctor Who 10 years ago, and whoever the doctor was 10 years ago is their doctor. Right. So it's been interesting to see that change over time as well.
Very cool. Who is your doctor?
Oh, this question is so hard. I guess the flippant answer is, I always say, is it's kind of like picking your favorite child, right? Like, yes. There's different ones at different times. Sometimes they misbehave and I like the other ones better. But I will never turn down a chance to watch Tom Baker. I'll never turn down a chance to watch Sylvester McCoy, which I know is not a non-obvious answer, but he was the doctor when I was that age. You know? Right. And then new doctors, I love David Tennant. And I really like Jodie Whittaker. I like the new doctor very much. Yeah,
that's great. My doctor was David Tennant. He was when I started watching. and Christopher Eccleston a little bit, but David Tennant was definitely my favorite. But having said that, I did try watching Doctor Who as a young child, and I'm pretty sure it was Tom Baker. It might have been reruns, I'm not sure. But I remember being quite terrified of the Cybermen. So I was quite young. And watching it from the other room, the TV's in the living room, I'm in the other room, or the hallway, kind of sneaking around the corner looking at it going, okay, I can't watch no more,
It's funny because I showed these classic episodes to my students, and these episodes are 50 years old, 40 years old. And they're not scary, right? No. To a grown-up now. And I always have to tell them, you're a 10-year-old kid who has never seen anything like this. At the time, this is cutting-edge technology. This is really new ideas. You've never seen this before. And it is terrifying. I remember one of the very first episodes, it might actually be the first episode I ever saw, was called Planet of Evil. It was a Tom Baker episode, and it was kind of like a Jekyll and Hyde kind of episode. But there was this antimatter pit. And I have vivid memories of just being transfixed in fear at the idea that there was a hole that would suck you in and just you would disappear. And I mean, I was like 7 or 8 or 9 or however old I was, And now I look at it and I'm like, that is so very cheesy. And I know exactly how they made it. But for a kid, man, it was just terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They do the horror part very, very well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is part of that class, is it about time travel, or do you have another class on time travel?
I teach another class on time travel.
Wow.
The Doctor Who class actually surprisingly doesn't talk about time travel very much.
That's hilarious.
But I do teach a class called Time Travel on Television. And it was largely based on a book I wrote called Time on TV, which I wrote back in 2010. So it's actually been 11 years since it came out. But Time on TV, I had noticed that all of the sci-fi shows that came out in about a 5-year span all had time travel in them. And I'm like, that's super weird. That's really interesting. As a fan, I'm like, that's great because I love time travel. As an academic, I was like, this means something. It means something that this all happened at the same time. Oh. And so I thought, let's investigate this. What else is happening in the mid-2000s to 2010? Social media got really big. Facebook came out, right. YouTube and MySpace. And so I was like, and in those, you're kind of time traveling in a way. You can scroll back on Facebook and look at yourself in the past. And Twitter, which had only just kind of come out at that point, was instantaneous. You're seeing what's happening at this point around the world. Right? So it's all playing with time in interesting ways. So I wrote this book called Time on TV. And then I was like, well, if I wrote a book about it, I should probably teach a class on it. And I honestly, I thought, one and done. I was going to teach this class. We'd talk about this interesting thing, and then, I would never teach it again. It turned out to be super popular. Fills every year that I teach it. I teach it every other year. We go through the history of time travel on television from the earliest example, which is a show called Captain Zero from the 1950s, up to very contemporary time travel. We read time travel short stories and talk about different types of time travel. We also read some physics on the actual physical possibilities of time travel.
Wow.
So we learn how time travel is actually a possibility, and there's nothing in the laws of the universe that says we can't. It's very difficult, and it probably won't happen, but it is possible. So yeah, it has become just this passion project. And now people I'm known as the time travel guy in my department. So they'll send me time travel stuff, and did you see this new show about time travel? I'm like, yep, I saw it because I'm still doing it. And I actually wrote about time travel board games. I wrote a chapter about, because there's surprisingly a lot of board games that focus on time travel, which is also really weird and interesting. So I like finding those little interesting things in a culture and saying like, why is that? What is that? Why is that happening right
now? Yeah, that's really interesting. What is a game that's about time travel, or a couple? I can't even think of one at the moment.
Time Stories is my favorite.
Yes. Yep.
Love Time Stories. There was a period where there are a bunch coming out. There's a game called Chronos, which is a time travel themed game.
I think that's Looney Labs. That's Looney Labs, I think. Isn't it?
No, Looney Labs did. That's the Chronos is not Looney Labs. No? I can't remember who published Chronos. Okay. Looney Labs did a time travel game though. The
it's
name
something
of which
like
is escaping me.
Okay. No, that's good.
Oh, you know what? It might be Chronos with a CH. The game I'm thinking of is Chronos with a K because it's German.
Oh, okay.
So it may maybe two games called Chronos. I am forgetting a big game, big time travel game. There's a small game called Parallax that came out. That's kind of time travel-y. Yeah, I'm forgetting a big one, but yeah, there may be 5 or 6 time travel games that came out.
That's cool.
And I was just like, let's play all these games and see what's happening. And also, of course, if you write a book about board games, they're tax deductible. So I'm saving all of my board game receipts and
yeah.
There you go.
Well, that sounds awesome. My favorite board game mechanic is the time track. And I would think if you were using time travel as your theme, that would have to include a time track.
Yeah,
you could get more time by going back in time or something. Yeah, there's something there.
Yeah. I just looked it up. Tragedy Looper was the game I was thinking of. I don't know if you've played Tragedy Looper. It's basically a Groundhog Day where you play through. It's a asynchronous or not asynchronous, asymmetrical. And one player is like trying to solve this crime that happened. The other players are enacting the crime and setting things up. And then at some point it reverses, goes back in time. They have to redo everything exactly as they had wanted to do it. And the detective person has to piece together how it happened. And you keep going back in time. You keep looping this tragedy, trying to solve it.
Interesting. Wow.
It is so good. It is, man, that's a good game.
I have not
highly recommend.
I have not played any of the ones that you mentioned, so I found a hole in my game playing.
We have some work to do.
Yeah. This is one of the things that I am constantly fascinated by. We're all board game fans. We all love board games. We love playing board games, but our experiences are wildly different. If you said you were a Marvel fan, then you assume you've seen the same 22 movies as the other people and read the same, 100 comic books or whatever. If you were a Doctor Who fan, we know the episodes, right?
Yeah.
I'm a board game fan. You're a board game fan. We've played completely different games.
Yeah.
Like the game, this goes back to what you're saying, Myron. The game itself isn't actually as important as that. We're fans of that experience of getting together, of that puzzle solving. And whether it's Gloomhaven or Time Stories or Tragedy Looper or Wingspan, that's what we're getting out of it.
Absolutely. And fun fact, when I moved to a new space, I go look for the gaming store. That's what I did when I came to that's how I met Chris.
Yeah.
When I moved to Pensacola, Florida for like a 3-month period while I was in the U.S. Navy, I went to the gaming store. When I moved to San Diego, I went to the gaming store, and there's something about these communities where we come and there's an assumption that we are going to do what we're capable to do to create that space for the sake of all of us having a good time or reasonably good time.
Yeah.
Well, when you gentlemen come to Chicago, I will take you out to, we've got a board game cafe. We've got a couple of big board game stores in Chicago. So yeah, lots of board gaming happening in my city.
I would love that. I would love that. We'll have to do it. Now, Myron and his wife you lived in Chicago before you moved here to Canada.
Yeah, we're from Chicago.
Oh, where did you live?
Yeah, we lived in Lombard before we left.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm originally from Humboldt Park, so
oh yeah,
Chicago and California area, those cross streets. We lived before we moved to the suburbs, though. We were in like old Irving Park.
Okay,
so like Elson, over there, Elson, where Elson, Montrose, Irving Park, like Montrose and Irving Park are like a block apart.
Yeah, yeah.
Elson, like, does this weird thing, and so that's where we lived for like 10 years or so before we moved out to the suburbs.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I love when you ask people where in Chicago they're from. They'll say the neighborhood and then the 2 streets.
Yes,
the
right?
2 streets that they're closest to, because it's a grid.
You want to make sure that people are like legit, like for real. Let's be honest, right?
Yeah.
Like, because when I was in the Navy, someone was like, "Yeah, I'm from Chicago." I'd be like, "Where?" And they were like, "Oh, I'm from like Hammond, Indiana." I'm like, "That's not Chicago, dude." So thank you for asking.
Yeah.
So it sounds like we're going to have to do a 4-person trip down to Chicago and stop by with you, play some games in the cafe, and Myron and Anna can take us on an eating tour. I've heard about some of the amazing restaurants that I want to go to.
Gotta get the Chicago dogs, the deep dish pizzas, the Italian
Pequod's pizza.
Pequod's pizza. Yes. Everyone in Chicago, you've got you're very particular about the type of deep dish that you get. Yeah. And it's a you're on sync with someone when you like the same one.
Yeah, Pequod's pizza is something special, Chris. Like,
wow.
Last time we were in Chicago, we were there in January of last year, 2020. And we tried to be very strategic. We went to Pequod's Pizza at like 11:36 on a Thursday p.m. And we were like, we're going to go in there. We're going to get Pequod's Pizza, blah, blah, blah. We got there and they were like, yo, like, what's your name? Do you have a reservation? Yo, like, it's 4 hours. Like, you want to wait 4 hours? And we were like, no. But next time, I'm going to be like, look, I'll just wait in the car, make the pizza, and we'll just take it back to the suburbs with us, because I am not going another 3 years without Pequod's Pizza. It's that good, Chris.
Wow.
It's that good. When you order the chicken wings, they cook them in butter, dude. Like, and there's, oh my, they do everything right.
That sounds amazing. That sounds amazing.
Oh, right. Have you ever had the wings there?
I am actually a vegetarian, so I have not had the chicken wings. But the pizza itself is superb because they bake the cheese right into the crust. So it's like a delicious, crispy, browned. Oh, so good.
They season
you guys have sold me.
Yeah,
that sounds like it's worth the trip alone. Well, at this point, I think I have to say, if you've been to Chicago and you have a favorite restaurant, please write us a message. You can get us at boardgamechats@gmail.com. Tell us what your favorite restaurant is, or something that we have to see when we go down to Chicago, because that sounds like a must-do. Well, I feel like we could talk to you about board games for another 3 more hours, and then Doctor Who will start a whole new podcast.
We'll do podcasts,
and then we'll do movies and TVs. I guess I would be remiss if I didn't ask this question. I've got a professor of pop culture on, and I want to know what's your favorite TV show and what are you watching now?
Oh, well, I mean, other than Doctor Who, right?
Doctor
Who is my favorite TV show of all time.
Fair enough.
I have a lot of favorite TV shows. And
you can give me 3.
Depends on the genre. I mean, I've also been a Star Trek fan for most of my life. So
you got to tell me the captain. You got to tell the captain.
Oh, I'm a Picard.
You know. Okay. Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a Jean-Luc Picard poster in the other room.
Nice.
Yeah, he's my man. But honestly, okay. So other shows that I really like recently, The Expanse. If you have not seen The Expanse, is absolutely amazing science fiction.
Fantastic books too.
Yes. I haven't read the books.
The books
I need to read them.
amazing.
And a great,
I've been learning French for the past. Oh, they have a board game too.
Yeah,
I've played the Expanse board game actually. It is very good. I just finished watching Sweet Tooth on Netflix.
Oh, okay.
Which is based on a graphic novel, and I thought was really wonderful. I really, really enjoyed that. So I like that. I also really liked the Paul McCartney documentary on Hulu. I don't know if do you have Hulu up in Canada?
Yeah, we can get it.
Yeah, we can get it somehow. Yeah.
There's a 6-part documentary, Paul McCartney and Rick Rubin in conversation. And I'm a huge Beatles fan, and it's just they kind of take some classic Beatles songs and then they just like play with the mix a little bit and change what it sounds like and talk about what did you do on the bass here and what did you do on the piano here. It's absolutely fascinating.
Wow.
So I kind of binged through that. And then let's see. Oh, I'm going to go old school on a sci-fi program that I'm sure some of your listeners have seen. Farscape.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I loved Farscape when it was on, and I feel like it doesn't get enough recognition. Like, I think it was ahead of its time in a lot of ways, and I think it's 20 years old now, and I'm like, got to get Farscape back in popular imagination. So
I like that answer. That's a good one. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for coming on. It's been a real pleasure.
This has been my pleasure. I have really enjoyed our conversation.
It has been fascinating, exciting. I have now to go to Chicago and maybe move there so I can take some of your classes.
Please do.
That's a destination for me in the future, perhaps. It's been wonderful talking to you. Fascinating. You guys have you're doing some great work. I look forward to hearing more about it and following you on social media. And with that in mind, do you want to tell us where people can reach you?
Sure. Best place, I'm on Twitter, which is @pbooth81, and email, which is also, I mean, if you just Google, actually don't Google Paul Booth because there's a very world famous tattoo artist that pops up.
Okay.
I am not the tattoo artist, but if you Google Paul Booth Depaul or Paul Booth Professor, then I pop up, and it's just pbooth@depaul.edu.
At depaul.edu.
.edu, yeah.
Okay, great.
I love hearing from people that have read my stuff and want to talk more about it. People that hated it want to talk about it. I like less, but I'll still talk to you.
Very good. Well, thank you again. Thank you so much.
Yes.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Likewise.
Thanks for listening to Board Game Chats with Chris and Myron. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast, check out their website at boardgamechats.com, or drop them an email at boardgamechats@gmail.com. You can also find Board Game Chats on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.